Council meeting tonight. My name is Jared Henderson. Presiding tonight is David Watts is out of town, I believe, tonight. We'll get started. Sorry, I got to read the instructions. I don't do this very often, and I didn't know I was doing it tonight. We'll get started with a pledge. Allison Adam is going to lead us in that.
Just right up to the podium. Right to the podium, right there. Yep.
Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Allison. Item 5.2, City Council comments and recognitions. Do we have any?
No, I don't.
I have lots of comments, but maybe not this section. All right, we'll move on to the public comment portion of our meeting. I have a couple of forms already for the public, which would be for the public hearing for the hunting. Which one is that? Item 7. So when that item comes up, I will call these names then rather than at this time, if that's okay. Public comment, audience members may bring any item to the City Council's attention. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes. State law prohibits the council from acting on items that do not appear on the agenda. So if you have any public comment forms, please take them to Chief Carr. The first one that I have is Allison Adams. Same microphone.
Is it okay if they come up with
Sure.
for this? Okay. Come on up, Malia and Sophia. So my name is Allison Adams. I am a third grade teacher at Blackridge Elementary just down the road. And our class is currently doing a civic responsibility social studies unit. And we also did a persuasive letter writing unit. So our class decided to write a persuasive letter to the council and ask for a community compost bin. Now we know it probably won't pass, but they wanted to test their freedom of speech and just get involved. But Malia and Sophia, is there anything you would like to say? No. And these are 2 students from my class.
I don't like talking in front of children.
It's okay, neither do we.
What about you, Sophia?
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay. Well, we have a few letters in this envelope that I'd be happy to give to one of you. And I included my email on the back if anyone would like to come talk to us, just to help us know how the process works. We have our own city council in our classroom, and they would love to have a city-to-city meeting with someone. So they are very excited. They did an excellent job, and we are so grateful to be able to come and be involved in our community.
Fantastic.
Thank
Thank you so much.
You bet. As I mentioned, we can't take any action on these sorts of items, but we'll definitely get on this and get somebody in touch with you.
For sure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here, you guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other public comments? Going once and twice. Seeing no others, we'll close the public comment portion of our meeting and move on to item 6, City Council Board and Committee reports.
I'll just quickly report on the mosquito abatement. One of the issues that we're tracking right now is a bill that I believe Senator Fillmore is running it. Yeah, Senator Fillmore. There was a couple of years ago, there was a pool of mosquitoes that tested positive for West Nile virus in the Daybreak area. And so what we do if that happens is we do what's called adulticide, which means we fog the area with something that would kill the mosquitoes in that area so that we can mitigate the potential health risk to the public. And apparently there was a gentleman that was having an outdoor function in his backyard when the fogging went on, and he was upset that fogging happened. And it doesn't necessarily present a public health risk to have the fogging. It's substantially more to have West Nile virus, but he was upset about not being notified, and so we worked with the HOA in Daybreak to make sure that if we are going to fog, that the HOA is notified, and so that the people in that area can know. He said that he was going to contact his legislature so that there could be some legislation that required us to notify. The problem with the notification with mosquito spraying is it has to be a certain wind, it has to be temperatures, there has to be a lot of things that fall in order. So even if we think we're going to spray one night, we might not spray because the wind isn't right or things like that. So it makes it a little bit more difficult to mandate that there has to be a notification. So I think that there's been some negotiation on that bill. It's SB 64 that would make it to where we just simply have to post it on our website, and then that way people can proactively sign up for that. So if they want notification, if there's a potential that we'll be spraying, that they would receive notification. So I'm not sure where that bill is gonna end up. It looks like it's probably gonna move forward, but there's been some substantial changes in it, so it's not as impactful to the abatement district as it would have been, because obviously we try not to get to the point where we have to adulticide. Everything is tried to be done when they're still in a larvae state, but it's important to still be able to have that option because of the disease problem with West Nile. So anyway, that was one of the major bills that will be affecting the mosquito abatement district. And that's my report.
Others?
Nothing big, just had the first Association of Municipal Councils meeting yesterday. Tons of new faces in there. It hadn't been well attended in last year, but with the new election cycle, it was very well attended. I mean, standing room only. Great conversations. One of the things that really came up was a conversation about last year's SB 34 and some potential modifications to that are coming up. Andrew has some modifications he wants to make to that bill, I think, to make it a little more difficult. One of the things that was interesting was talking about how areas that are substantially built out or built up, their difficulty in complying with this because there's no area to build new housing, and the cost to tear something down to build new housing would make it no longer compliant with the whole idea. So it's interesting also the idea that if you dedicated a certain area for affordable housing, quote unquote, or moderate income housing, that with the rate of appreciation that we're seeing in home values in Utah, especially in the Salt Lake area, and more specifically, the substantial appreciation in values for multifamily homes, even if you created X number of homes at, say, $240,000, at the appreciation rates that they're seeing, that home would be worth $300,000 in 2 years. It's a really, really complex issue. And I think that—
I mean, it's not one for government to solve, it's an economic issue?
It is an economic issue. And I think that although well-intentioned, some of the bills that we're seeing really aren't accomplishing what they were intended to. I think everybody in this room probably knows that government does things that doesn't actually accomplish what they're supposed to. But it's important for a city, you know, we have requirements under this bill to be looking at options and looking at ideas and finding ways to apply the 23 items in our city. I think we're doing better than most. But I think we need to be cognizant that there could be some additional requirements there and be working with our lobbyists and other people to make sure that we're advocating appropriately for the kind of development that needs to happen in Herriman. So.
A couple of quick updates. I sit on the Joint Policy Advisory Committee, and we met last week. And in that meeting, obviously, since we're in the middle of the legislative session, we did go through a legislative update as far as those potential bills as they relate to funding, in particular UDOT funding. Again, it's early in the session, and there's still much to be done in terms of final budgets with the repeal of the tax reform and how that falls out. Next, we reviewed had representatives from UTA, the executive director of UTA, Carol and Gnott, there who reviewed with us the Front Runner business plan and how they look to maximize Front Runner. Their ridership has surpassed what they originally anticipated. It's also, you know, that service has been around for several years now, and they're still working on ways to expand that. They're looking at ways to how to maximize what infrastructure is currently in place. Part of that is looking at going to a double track along the whole system, which would allow multiple uses and timings, more frequency of trains, some that can be on express routes, so they don't stop at all of the Front Runner stops, and those types of maneuvers to help maximize that. Now, of course, that all comes at a cost, and so we were looking at some of their plans, those areas they want to first focus on expanding that service, and how to, again, plan forward for additional funding, primarily federal funding, to help expand that system. As part of that, they're also looking at completing at least a study of a statewide rail plan that runs basically from top to bottom, and how do we maximize some of the rail systems we already have in place, in as much as that we even coexist with transit and freight on the same rails, and how we can accomplish that. So again, forward thinking is how we can get more transit options out there for our people. They've also explored the use of an e-voucher system through UTA, and what they have found is that a system, although it seems like it should exist, doesn't already really exist that meets the needs of being able to do an e-voucher system for ridership on that. So we're going to basically kind of pull back because we don't have the money to invest in creating that whole system on our own, and look for potential private partnerships to help potentially explore that option moving forward. And then lastly, as part of JPAC, we did the review of the Utah's Unified Transportation Plan, which was presented by Wasatch Front Regional Council. Again, this looks at funding for the major projects across the entire Wasatch Front, projects like the I-15 expansion, the overpasses put in along Bangerter Highway, and looking out at how do we continue to get the funding we need to eventually turn a Bangerter Highway into a freeway system with no more interchanges along there to slow that traffic down. I'm sure that anyone sitting in here, if I asked you what your number one complaint or concern was that was voiced to us, it would be traffic concerns. And so we're continuing to look at ways to plan ahead and find the funding we need to accomplish those projects. The last item that I want to mention goes along with transit and making sure that our residents are aware. A couple of months ago, UTA launched a pilot program that really is centered in the south end of the valley. It covers all of Herriman, Riverton, most of Draper, and a little bit of South Jordan. And this program is called VIA, and you may have seen some of the vans around. They're a gray and light blue van around that says UTA and VIA on the side. I don't know that we've done a great job of advertising this service that is out there. But again, this is a pilot program that works really similar to what an Uber or a Lyft does for you. And you download an app, and if you go to UTA's website and just search for VIA, you will find it very easily. But the way this works is it's very Uber-ish, meaning that you can call for a ride on the app, and it will tell you their closest pickup location. This isn't going to be a door-to-door service. It's going to be a corner-to-corner service is what they refer to this. You may have to walk to the end of your street for a more centralized pickup point. But these rides, again, if you can see the map that exists for this service, you can go anywhere within that area, that geographical area that's designated for this pilot program. It can connect you to the existing transit options, the Daybreak Front Runner station, or excuse me, the Daybreak Track Station, or down to Front Runner and Draper, and access the system that way, and then use that as it's referred to as a piece that will help connect the first and the last mile, which is the hardest piece really to cover that gap for individuals. So I encourage you, if you are commuting, to look at your options and to look at the VIA. Right now, an adult one-way fare is $250. So it's going to be much cheaper if you're willing to do just a little walk to the corner and get dropped out from the corner and over to your final destination. It's going to save you substantially over if you were to call an Uber or a Lyft as part of that. So again, just wanted to put the plug out, and we'll try and do a better job as a city to at least advertise that service that's out there and make sure that our residents know of this pilot program that's in place. What we really want to see is this a viable option for us to continue to pursue as I sit on the UTA advisory board, or do we need to look at other options? But so far we're hearing a lot of positive feedback on this. So that's it. Thank you.
Well, my reports will kind of dovetail on transportation. But first, from the Utah League of Cities and Towns, which is an organization that we participate in along with every other city and town in the state, to basically lobby during the legislative session on behalf of cities and towns. And every year, cities and towns are kind of under fire. I think they want to take our decision-making ability away and give it to those above us, mainly land use decisions, zoning, et cetera. So I made the comment about that's an economic issue, not a government issue. The idea that changing zoning can help with affordable housing, et cetera. But every session I think last year was a record year. There were hundreds of bills trying to take our authority away and give it to those above us. This year, there's several of those things of most importance so far, and I think this next week is when a lot more of the bills will be unveiled. They're still being written and going through committee, et cetera. But one that was brought to our attention this week was HB 273, Property Rights Ombudsman Amendments. The Ombudsman is a nonprofit, impartial organization under the Division of Commerce. If I'm correct, yes? I'm looking at Brett and Tammy, they were there at that meeting. To give opinions on property disputes, et cetera. This bill is wanting to basically make their decisions binding. If it ever goes to court and we ignored whatever advice was given by them, that the plaintiff, the developers, could sue the city for damages. Yeah, exactly. Opens up Pandora's box, but there isn't a balance of the scale to say that we could do the same the other way. Right? That if the decision was the other way, that we could sue them for damages for all the time and effort that we've spent working on that issue, et cetera. So I think that's going to be vigorously opposed by the league and others, but that's one of the main concern right now, and there's always a slew of others that come down the pipe, but want to make sure everybody knew about that one. Next would be the Southwest Mayor's Caucus. During the legislative session beginning last week, we hold a luncheon every week for our area legislators. So all of the representatives and senators from West Jordan, South Jordan, Copperton, Herriman, Bluffdale, Riverton. I think there's a total of 14 or 16 total. We invite them, and most of them, the attendance has been pretty good. They come and have lunch with us, and we talk about the issues that are pertinent to the Southwest, mainly transportation. The Southwest Visioning Study and Olympia Hills has been of foremost importance. Two things I want to touch on is transportation. So Wasatch Front Regional Council spoke last week at that luncheon and made the comment that it's nearly impossible to qualify for federal funds for new transit projects a huge amount of their criteria is ridership. Well, how do you have ridership if you don't have a train? That doesn't make sense to me. But basically, the hurdles that they've put in place, the requirements to obtain federal funding, are of the nature that it's just not an option. And for Olympia Hills to claim that a major part, and I quote, a major part of their plan is public transportation. We don't even have it in Herriman. We don't have any core bus routes yet. We don't have access to train, et cetera, is a little disingenuous, in my opinion. But it was interesting to have Wasatch Front Regional Council, who controls regional federal transportation dollars, tell us flat out that, yeah, that's probably not going to happen anytime soon, like for a decade at least, to even be eligible for any of those kinds of funds. On the same note, they made the point that when I-15 and I-215 were first put in, those were built largely with federal dollars, that those programs don't exist now to help us with Mountain View and Bangor, et cetera. So this week we had a presentation from UDOT, which was very interesting. I have like 3 pages of notes, and it happened today, so you guys get this because it's right in front of me. But for the next portion, this last year and a half, you saw the construction on the major intersections. There were 4 of them, 5400 South, 70th South, 90th, 114th, the grade separated interchanges. We've all, I don't know if any of you drive that often, but as I do to get my kid to soccer going both ways, those have been great, but then you hit a stop at 106th and 98th, and et cetera. So eventually the plan is get it all the way there, but where's the money gonna come from? They have 3 more that are funded that are gonna happen. These are slated to be completed by summer of 2021, 6200 South, 104th, and 126th, which will really help with this area, but that still leaves a gap of 9800. There's gonna be a stoplight right in the middle of basically 2 ends of a freeway. And then again at 134th and 27th. And what they're telling us today is that while those would be part of the next section to get built, they're not funded. There's a plan, but there's no funding. There's no money lined up to pay for them. So after this next project, those 3 interchanges, 6200 South, 104th, 126th, get done in the next 18 months, there's no money to do anything after that.
And each one of those intersections is $50 million.
Give or take, yeah. In that range. They gave us like 47 to 65 million was kind of the average to go through and do those. But a large amount of that cost is right-of-way. That's a nice way for saying we have to buy people's houses and knock them down to put those in to get the right-of-way, right? So part of what we're talking about with the Southwest Visioning Study is if we're gonna do any kind of east-west corridor, we have to identify that corridor now, buy that now before it becomes implausible. Did any of you know that in 2008, a study was completed by UDOT, the state mandated a study to be done that said that 90th South should have been a freeway, an east-west expressway. I don't think that's ever going to happen at this point because houses are built right up next to the road. So it's imperative that we work together with our surrounding cities and set aside some of these corridors. Now, funding is the issue. Where's the money gonna come from? So while we're thankful to have this next stretch of 3 grade-separated interchanges done, there's no more money after that. One of the senators, our area senators, lamented that, well, because the way he put it was that because the citizens didn't like the tax bill, there's no money. And I thought, well, no, because of the way he went about it. What was probably wrong. But the money is the issue. Where's it gonna come from? Plans are there and plans come and go. I spoke with a candidate for governor a couple weeks ago, and he made the comment that, well, you need a plan. If the plan's there, then things will happen. I looked at him and said, there's all of these plans that have never come to anything. I need to be in the planning business and do those consultant fees, because that's where the money goes in the plan. The funding to actually do the project never really happened. So what we're really trying to accomplish by the 6 cities coming together is use that kind of their strength in numbers. If we can get behind, coalesce around what we think the major issues are and look at the funding options and agree on that and get our area legislators to agree on that, we'll have much more luck in getting those things done, if that makes sense. The remaining projects that need to be done beyond what is funded to fully get Bangor done with interchanges is $600 million. Mountain View, just to connect it north and south, and I don't think that this is even converting the entire thing to freeway. Is
Just the connection.
just the connection, both ends, and portions of that will be freeway that go back to what we see out here with the frontage roads. $1 billion, today's dollars. So the idea that we're going to rely on Mountain View and Bangor for all this development west is just a fallacy, because the money's not there. It's not going to happen for decades. So know that we're doing our part, but we need your help to reach out to your area legislators, especially during sessions like this, to say how important these things are. Reach out to the county council and tell them that putting Olympia Hills on top of all of this is not going to help us at all. That's my reports. Any questions, comments, discussion? All right, so we're
Just as a follow-up to your last comment, though, just by announcement, I know there's a lot of attention and concern about Olympia Hills and what's happening there. It looks like there will be an agenda item for Tuesday, February 25th, that the county council will be having their first of 2 votes on Olympia Hills. It is important that you, as citizens and residents, make your voices heard. Please reach out to all the members of the county council, tell them your feelings, explain to them the issues that are out here and why this will make it worse. Everybody needs to speak up.
if they don't hear from enough people, they'll assume that it's okay.
Yeah.
That's not how it should be, but that's how it is, and that's what I'm hearing,
Very much so.
feedback from a few of those council members. They're saying, Jared, not enough people are against this. We haven't heard from enough people.
Yeah, they've gotten a little over 200 emails as of last week. It's probably ticked up a much, but
Even your friends and
Even that's
relatives
not
that don't live out here, that's even more powerful, as if they live on the other side of the valley, they need to help you out and send a quick email. If it comes from other areas, that actually speaks volumes, because we're being labeled as those people in Herriman just complain too much, right? All right, so let's move on to our public hearing. Procedure for public hearing, we'll have a presentation by a staff member, we'll have a presentation by the applicant, which in this case is us, I think. Comment from the public, and then we'll close that public comment portion, have a discussion, and go from there. So we'll open the public hearing at this time. I've got 2 comment forms to start
Go to
with.
the presentation first.
Oh, presentation, my bad. Sorry. Like I said, I don't do this very often. Justin's gonna give his presentation.
So I'm happy to be bringing this back. It's been over 6 months worth of discussion and research and experience that we've had through, thanks, Tammy, through one hunting season since some of these things have been going on. So I'm happy to be bringing this back. I want to thank some of the people that's been involved a lot. We have some staff. Wendy Thomas has been involved with working through trails and open space. Chief Carr's been helpful on discussion on safety and some of the concerns that they've viewed over the last 6 months. And then Riley Peck with the Division of Wildlife Resources has been a great partner. They've been very, very open to any discussions and making this work for us. And then also John Brim's helping us get the ordinances in place, or the draft ordinances written. So we'll go through a little bit of background on where we've been, kind of some understanding of some of the things moving forward. So currently, there's no city ordinance that's regulating hunting. Hunting's taken place within city limits since incorporation, and sometimes even before that, right? And then hunting interest has increased for a couple of reasons that I've identified. It's probably been more than this, but these are the big ones. Within the last year, the DWR's opened a new hunting season within the Herriman area, the extended archery hunt. And then also, the city purchased land in the foothills, which is making more of that public lands and not private. So some of those things are reasons of why we've seen some increased interest. As I said, we've discussed this for over 6 months. Last year, we brought it up sometime towards the end of summer and had some discussions. City Council felt like it was kind of a rush situation to try and get something in place before last hunting season. And so they wanted to allow public input and to work through some of the concerns that we all had. And so we wanted to push it back to bring it back the first of the year. And then we had quite a bit of discussion and presentation at our last city council meeting, where we received some direction from you on kind of how we want to push this forward. And so some of this information will be based on that. Some of the resident concerns, we received many, but I just kind of made a brief list of some of the ones. There were a lot of the same. Conflicting interest in the recreation areas. The trails, we're trying to push the trails and recreation areas in our south foothills here The safety of the interaction between the two recreational seemed like a concern, and they're valid safety concerns. Hunters not abiding by laws and rules, I think we have that in anything we have, right? There's people that aren't going to abide by laws and rules, but those were a lot of the concerns that we had brought up to us. Trespassing on our own, within our city limits, on people's property, trying to access areas, and some of that was inadvertent, not knowing quite where property boundaries are. It is the responsibility of the hunter to know those boundaries, but we had a large concern, a valid concern again, from the residents in High Country 2. That is an unincorporated county. It's a private HOA. We received many concerned comments, and I see some familiar faces in here from that I've spoken with on trespassing, safety concerns, people driving up their driveways to try and access the mountain. And so we've received many of those, and we've tried to address some of those concerns, not only with our own mapping, but working with DWR. Access points not clearly defined. That is something we can easily work on in the future with mapping and signage and those types of things. And then I also did receive many phone calls of people that were interested in the hunting, appreciative that, this is an opportunity that they have, wanting to keep, those type of traditions and things going, that there are many avid hunters, not only in Herriman, but in the entire state. And I received many calls, a lot of people wanting to gain information on property that they can hunt, how they can access. So, I think there was some interest in some responsible hunters there as well. So, but I will say trespassing was overwhelming concern. So some of the options that we presented last council meeting on the 22nd was a do-nothing option, and that is basically continue the way we are today. Hunting is allowed on public and private property. Discharge of legal weapons would be allowed for hunting, and the hunters must follow the state administrative rules and laws. One of the most important being the buffer between where they can discharge a firearm and a dwelling or a building, which is 600 feet. We discussed an option of no hunting within city limits, and that would mean we'd have to adopt an ordinance saying such, and then adopt regulations of discharge of any weapons. And no discharge of weapons basically controls that as well. The other option we discussed was an ordinance to regulate the discharge of weapons. If we wanted to, we could basically follow state laws, but some of the other things we could do in an ordinance would be to regulate the types of weapons if we wanted, specify areas where certain weapons could be discharged, who can discharge those weapons, and the times of year if we wanted to say, orient those times around hunting season. So those are some of the things we could address in a hunting ordinance. So from there, we wanted to determine a path forward based on the 6 months of worth of work we've done, and then also the discussion that we had last council meeting. So here's a draft ordinance that I worked with John Brims with. It models another city's ordinance that, that ordinance has been in place for a long time. It's Salt Lake City's ordinance, and they do allow hunting and discharge of weapons within their city limits, but they have restrictions on what types of weapons. So I know it can be hard to read, so I'll kind of address just some of those discharge of firearms that's prohibited, but these would be exceptions to that rule, okay? So at a regularly licensed shooting gallery, we don't really have that now, but if we had one, we could allow that. At a Herriman City Police target range, at a school that is a supervised course of instruction, a regularly organized gun shooting range where the range and facilities have been approved, and that is, we haven't filled that in. That's a question, who would approve that? Would it be council? Would it be the mayor? Would it be the city manager? So we'll have those discussions on who would approve. A mobile range trailer, and that also needs to be approved by that body. And then getting into some of the, where you can discharge weapons would be, they would have restrictions on rifles, handguns, muzzleloaders, and then shotguns as well, using different types of ammunition. There would be limits on those as far as they may be further away from the dwellings. Then we also have a shotgun and archery, which may have a lesser of a buffer. And then other reasons to discharge would be police officers in the performance of their duties, locations and/or events approved. We wanted to have something, if we haven't listed something, we wanted to allow some opportunity if someone brought something to the body to say, would you allow this? Because we obviously can't think of everything. So we allowed that in there. They would have to come before the body. Then ceremonies for, say, funerals and those types of things. So that's kind of what the current draft ordinance says. We've had some good discussion in our last council meeting on some of this. And so we put together some maps just to kind of identify what some of these buffers may look like and then identify some of those certain areas that we talked about. So looking at this is a map of our surrounding area. So the red line is our city limits. The blue line that kind of outlines the perimeter of the developed area, that identifies a 600-foot buffer from those areas. The orange identifies areas where with this map and this buffer where they may be allowed. And then also we've identified some hashed out areas that is city-owned property up on the South Hills and throughout other various parts of the city. One comment that we had that we will address on here is we want to make sure to identify private property. And so we'll do something on this map to identify that. And then one of the other things that's on this map is we've identified that private HOA, those private HOAs that are to the west of us, and we say private HOA, no hunting access. And that's basically no hunting access to Herriman city property or properties within Herriman, because that is private. There is one exception on that map as well that we will make. Rose Canyon Road, which goes through High Country 2, is a county-owned road, so that's a public road, but everything outside of that are private. And so basically, if you're going there to access hunting area, that is private property and it's subject to trespass. Here's another map showing a half-mile buffer. Now again, these were just options to bring back for visual effects because we discussed some of these things when we were talking about possible different weapons that could be discharged. As you can see, we have the same other descriptions on the map, but you can just see that blue area has been expanded, taking out essentially all of the hunting access within the developed area of Herriman and leaving the majority of that, if not all of it, to the South Mountain area. And then this is a 1 mile buffer. Again, this one basically eliminates essentially all of the areas with the small exception to the south. So kind of moving forward, the direction we'll be looking for through public comment and then some of the discussion with council is, do we want to do nothing with the weapon discharge ordinance? We could, do nothing, and then we can do a discharge ordinance, increase education with MAPS and DWR. Like I said, they've been a great partner and willing to do a lot of things to try and help educate. We can regulate the weapons discharge with ordinance, and then create some buffers if we want to have different weapons, prohibit certain weapon types, locations, and those types of things we identified in this draft ordinance. Or we could do the no hunting and discharge of weapons. So those were a few of the things that we wanted to talk about. I want to say that DWR mentioned a few things in the meeting a little bit earlier, that they have these throughout the state and they've worked well. They are going to continue to implement these in different areas of the state, not only to allow for access and more opportunity for hunters, but they're also using it to help with deer mitigation with the urban deer in urban areas. They're seeing some of that reduction by allowing some of these hunts to happen, keeps pressure on the animals out to keep them out of the city. We've had a successful deer mitigation program for a number of years, and I think that, in my opinion, this would help with those types of things. We've eliminated a lot of the safety concerns with auto deer accidents over the years. It's basically gone down. I don't want to say none, but it's drastically decreased. So that's essentially my presentation. So if you have any questions of me.
The only question I have is maybe more of a comment. We've had lots of these discussions. Some of those that are here tonight or watching might not have seen those discussions. The change that's happened, that's why this is before us, is that the city's qualified for federal funds to buy portions of the mountain to create a buffer for Camp Williams. So now a lot of the property up on the mountain is actually city-owned. So it's not just out there. It's in our boundary, and now we have to make a decision. Secondly, and I don't know if our representative from the Division of Wildlife Resources wants to comment to it, but they've extended archery hunts into these types of areas, which the two combined is kind of forcing us to make a decision. Do we want to just leave things how they are with state hunting rules, or do we want to have other ordinances within our city? That
Yeah.
sum it up well
Would you
enough,
like
or
Riley to come up?
if you want to give some background.
Yeah, thank you, members of the council. So Riley Peck, I work with the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. And I guess just to follow up with what you said, ever since we've started hunting in the state, there has been a hunting season in Herriman. That has never gone away. Even this last year, in these foothills, it has been legal to hunt with a rifle or a muzzleloader or a shotgun. Some of the new interest that you were talking about has come about recently because we have extended the archery season, maybe in an effort to do away, or not do away, but reduce the amount of hunters that are up there during the rifle and muzzleloader seasons, and give a weapon type that may be a little bit more conducive to that urban wildlife interface. And so this was the first year that that season date has been extended. And so there is always some growing pains and some learning curves, and makes that difficult. And that is no different than what it has been in other portions of the state. As mentioned, we were introducing this last year. There were at least 6 others that were introduced at the same time, and multiple others planned to be introduced this year and into the future. And so we anticipate that there will be some growing pains, some learning curve on our part as well. And so we're here basically to hear, or I'm here to understand what the frustrations are with the city, and see if we can help and where we can be a good partner.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Ready to open up public comment? Thanks, Justin. All right, so we'll open the public comment portion. I've got two comment forms. First, Catherine Fuller. You guys wouldn't mind just come to the microphone and state your name.
Hi, I'm Catherine Fuller. I live in High Country 2, I live right on Rose Canyon Road. And we've only been up there 5 years. We've always seen a little bit of activity of poachers coming up on private land. And usually those were happening not even in deer season, but it wasn't. But this last deer season was out of control. I was daily having people come. Our property is, the creek is flowing right through our property, right next to Rose Canyon Road. And so it's a major deer crossing from both sides of the hills coming down to our creek. The hunters picked up on that pretty quick. So I would find hunters on the other side of my corral where my horses are, hiding in the bushes. and they would argue with me as to whether this was private land or not private land, or whether they were allowed. And it became such a common conversation that I realized something's confusing. There's not this many people that are just out here to break the rules. They're confused as to where they can hunt and where they can't. So when I went onto the DWR website today, I was looking at what the boundaries are and what they marked for being the Herriman hunting area. And it looked like to me that High Country 2 takes up a good chunk of that area. So once people come up the canyon and they think that that's based on what they're looking at on the map, they think that's all hunting area. And they recognize that there's homes up there, but when they're looking at the map, they're supposed to be able to hunt. So I think a lot of the hunters are really, unless they are local, and with the extended bow hunt, we were running into people that don't live in this area. They were coming from other parts of the state of Utah into our area, so they weren't familiar that that's even a private HOA. So that was where some of the confusion was. As far as if they can hunt on the trails that we connect up to, the Yellow Fork Trail System, where we have equestrian riders and hikers and bikers. I was taking and riding my horse at least 3 times a week on those trails during the hunting season. And I would come up on, my horse will stop and stare into the bushes. Luckily, my horse won't spook, but will give me a heads up. There's something there that I don't like. And if I stared long enough, I could see a hunter in camouflage up under there with his bow. It concerned me because there are a lot of people with riding there and with equestrian that could spook their horse and throw them. So it's just not a wise mix, I don't think. I've done hunting a long time ago in my past. I'm not against hunting completely, but it seems like it's such a confined area that we're trying to mix some activities that are just not going to merge well without creating some accidents. Right in front of our house, I'm sure many of you heard the story, right in front of our house was the guy that decided to shoot the deer from his car on Rose Canyon Road. And of course, the deer takes off across the property, so he was tracking across private property, trying to catch this deer, or trying to locate the deer that he shot. And we've got pictures of other deer with arrows sticking out and wandering around on private property that we had to call and have put down. It was just crazy. It was more than what we had experienced before. And the only thing I could attribute it to is the extended bow hunt and that bringing in so many more hunters from other areas that just didn't understand what all up there is private. I mean, we've got 2.5 acre lots, but we've also got 5 acre and 10 acre. And people are confused because we don't have, and people are putting up no trespassing signs. And some of these kids, some of these hunters are very young. And I have a neighbor where they showed up in her arena and wanted to know why they couldn't hunt. So it's just a concern. And I don't know if on the DWR, one way to solve it is when they put that map is to show where High Country 2 is in a different color.
Yeah, I'm sure Riley would be happy to speak with you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next form I have is Patricia, sorry, I can't see. Stanko.
Good evening, my name is Patty Stanko, and I also am a High Country 2 resident. And sadly, the Herriman hunting extended bow hunt, your problem has become our problem in a big way. There really isn't a lot of area in Herriman to hunt, particularly when the open bow hunt. I don't know how many tags are given out, but I think too many to support that area. So they flow over to our area thinking that, okay, we can do this. And even if the map is not clear, as we were told by Jason, it is the hunter's responsibility to know where they can hunt. I've called everybody I can think of to call from DWR when I have people trespassing on my property. I have lived there for 11 years. Never, ever have I seen anything like this. I had a young boy, 12 years old, he didn't knock on my door. He probably wasn't going to do anything except I confronted him. I happened to see them on the side of my house and said, "Can I help you?" Well, we have tags to hunt in the city of Herriman, and we're not having any luck. Can we shoot the deer in your yard? No, you can't. Other situations, a neighbor, 78 years old, saw people hunting on her property. She calls me the next day, it's too late now. I didn't know what to do. I saw that 2 fathers and sons. So now you have fathers teaching their sons that it's okay to trespass and hunt illegally. Killed a deer on her property. She watched them gut it and watched them take it away. She didn't know what to do. She's 78 years old. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. Those are things that should not have to happen. The reason they're happening is Herriman, 20 years ago, the population was about 700. It is now close to 60,000 people. And the extended bow hunt is open statewide, so people from anywhere in the state of Utah can come here and hunt. They don't know where they're supposed to be exactly. It's difficult. It's very, very difficult. You're opening up a huge can of worms. Were there any accidents this year? Were there any people that were hurt? No, there weren't. But one is too many. One is too many. When you have a 12-year-old with a lethal weapon, who I'm sorry to say probably couldn't hit the broadside of my barn, coming up there to hunt, when I've got horses and dogs, and God forbid my granddaughter out there playing. This is not an area where that should be happening. And I would ask you to consider that there would be no hunting, no discharge of a lethal weapon in the city of Herriman. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Those are the only two comment forms I have. Do anybody else have comments on this issue?
Hi, my name is Steve Schlesinger. I live in just south of Butterfield Park. I've been active in dealing with this hunting issue for a number of months now. I've talked with Wendy, I've talked with Steve, talked with Justin. The issues I have are a few. I've mentioned this before about using the BST extension trail as a boundary. One of the issues you have is you're going to put a 600-foot boundary, which then encompasses various pieces of property. If you use the BST extension, or anything below it, you can't hunt below. You can't hunt below it. You hunt above it. It makes it a very clear delimiter of where the buffer should be. And again, 600-foot buffer. I mean, it's a line that cuts through a lot of different properties, so a lot of different elevations. So it makes it a lot harder. But if you use the trail, it makes it a lot easier for them to understand. The other question is, can they shoot into a buffer area? So if they're sitting outside the buffer area and there's deer inside the buffer area, can they shoot into it? I don't know the answer to that. One comment that was made this afternoon was there's an urban deer program. Does that allow them to go inside the buffer or not? So does the urban deer program allow them to go inside the buffer and shoot, or does it not? Don't know the answer to that. And then last year when I actually came, it really hit me hard on this thing was there were two guys up on the mountain above me, one with a bow, one pushing the deer towards him. I don't know if that's allowed or not. I don't know if they can actually guide deer towards the hunter or not. And the last thing I have is a reference to the police. So if I call the police that there's a trespasser on my property, there's a person inside the buffer, what's the response time I'm looking at? I mean, I understand that there are a lot of factors that go into that, but I mean, if there's nothing really, no emergencies going. I am in an incorporated area, yes. I am inside the city limits. Okay. No, I'm inside the city limits. So I'm inside the city limits. Okay. But it's not like a priority. Right, I understand that. So, okay. So those are my comments. And Wendy, I've talked with you before. Justin, I've talked with you tonight about this. I'd be more than happy to sit down with you, especially since you're coming up with a recommendation over the next 2 weeks, to sit down with you, help you guide that decision. I do live up on the mountain. I am not opposed to hunting, but I am opposed to the people coming into the area that they shouldn't be in and hunting those deer or other animals. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Steve. Any other comments? Okay, we'll see none. We'll close the public.
Do I need to do it by motion? I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion and second. Do I need a roll call on this, Jackie? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, so the public hearing on this has been closed. Discussion amongst the council.
I appreciate those that have come out tonight to be, make their voices heard as part of the public hearing on this item. It's something that, again, that we've been looking at, discussing for quite some time. First and foremost, I just want to say my goal is safety, first and foremost. That being said, I also want to recognize that hunting has been part of Herriman for a lot of those people growing up for years. I grew up a hunter myself, and we are really working to try and find that right balance for recreation, especially as we continue to acquire land on the South Hills here for the city to really preserve that. And so I think for me, that's the challenge here is, you know, we have recreational opportunities for those riding their horses, for hikers, for bikers. You know, hopefully in the future we will have some for off-road vehicles. And this is another component of recreation that I think is important for us to consider moving forward. And how do we make sure that we provide for, integrate all of those different recreational uses together, but again, make sure that there's safety involved in that. So again, those are the parameters that I'm using, and as I look at this issue, and as we try and come to a decision of what we want to do within our city. Again, I appreciate those that have spent the time to come out and share their information, because that's helpful for me in making a final determination.
Same, I appreciate everybody that's commented. I've been pretty vocal in support of this also. I think that when we're using taxpayer money to purchase property, we can't just say only this certain people can recreate there if we're buying it for recreation. I don't know if this is a good analogy, but I was thinking we let people drive all over our city, and I can't think of a more lethal weapon than a vehicle. People die in vehicle crashes every day. But we also have people jogging on our roads, walking on our roads, biking on our roads, those types of things. And so we have to figure out how to work together and make things safe for one another. There are people that break traffic laws every day, and we have enforcement that tries to take care of people to try and make sure that people stay within those parameters of keeping people safe. And I think it's the same with hunting. There's no question about the fact that it's a lethal weapon that is used to hunt with. In our work meeting discussion, we discussed quite a bit about rifle hunting, which is significantly different than archery as far as lethal weapon and the range and things like that. So I think that it's important to take all these things into consideration. I think that we had a huge blast of hunters, there's no doubt, because when they added it to the extended archery, then everybody wants to come and check it out and see how it's going to be. I believe that over time we'll just see that decrease and normalize and level out, that we won't have the same types of issues that we continue to have. So I would guess that we need to continue to look at this and monitor it and watch it, especially as we continue to grow. But and I believe that, you know, we obviously have the same expectation with the DWR as being a good partner with us to make sure that the maps are correct, that the people are clear, that the high country too is not open for hunting. That needs to be very clear so that people can understand that the responsibility is for the hunter. That there's no question. It's no different than the responsibility is if you're a driver. You're supposed to know the laws and rules. It's the same with hunting. You're supposed to know the laws and rules and abide by them. So we have enforcement. Our officers last year increased their enforcement in those areas to try and mitigate that, and we'll continue to do that as part of the budget. And for them, as I understand it, will be part of their budget for next year, is to make sure that we have good enforcement, to make sure that the people who are doing what was described here tonight are getting ticketed or corrected on those types of things. So I look forward to more discussion on this, and just looking forward to making a good ordinance.
So thanks everyone for coming out and talking about your issues. Let me first say that there is nothing in supporting a hunting program or the proper hunting program that is in any way supporting trespassing or breaking the law. Hunters have a responsibility above and beyond just an average recreational person to be very cognizant of safety, of the laws, of where they're hunting and what they should be doing. And those that aren't following those rules, they need to be educated, and if they're being egregious, they need to be punished. We agree they shouldn't be in your yards, they shouldn't be on your roads, they shouldn't be on your property. That being said, a great deal of land that is open, that is owned by the city of Herriman, that is public land. We have to balance the rights of people to recreate and walk and bike, and as well as those who want to be able to hunt. We can't say that one right is more important than another right. We want to be cognizant of the fact that there is a heritage of hunting in Herriman, and be respectful of that. At the same time, acknowledging all those things. As Clint said, our primary focus on this is safety. We're taking a very serious look at how much of a buffer needs to be between private property and where hunters are allowed to hunt. We're looking very closely at eliminating rifle hunts altogether, and only allowing archery hunt a certain distance from homes. There's some discussion to be had about whether or not shotguns and birds are appropriate, and we're trying to consider that and look for more input before we make a final decision. But this isn't something that is being taken lightly. We understand the importance of having a good ordinance and a proper regulation of this that's well published. We're glad to have the DWR here talking about how we can perhaps expedite a decision on this that might allow them to include in all of their printed materials clear designated maps well ahead of the hunt season, so that there's no basis for a misunderstanding. We want to really discourage any of the problems that have been discussed tonight. As to where or not those boundaries should be held, we look for public comment, we look for feedback and information. Appreciate, Steve, your comments about where you think that line should be. That's helpful for us in determining what's an appropriate buffer. But again, for those that have concerns, please contact us, please communicate with us, let us know. We want to make sure that we're considering all the options before we make a final decision on this.
I feel the need to kind of restate a couple of things. As I said, we've had lots of discussion about this topic already. A lot of the concerns that were raised tonight are absolutely valid, and they're ones that have been raised in other meetings. I would just point out a couple of things. One is that the area of the hunt is not being extended. Right? It's just the duration, the length of time it's allowed, so that nothing has changed in that regard. What has changed in regards to the area is that it went from being private property to public property. So in a way, that area has been enlarged because it's now Herriman City property. It's public property versus outright private property. So that part of it is kind of our decision whether to allow it there or not. And that is the task at hand, is to, one, every one of our discussions is started with safety. And we look to our law enforcement experts for a lot of that in every one of these discussions. But then it's to balance the land use. How can we use taxpayer dollars to set aside this land for recreation and then tell people they can't recreate? Well, safety I think kind of has to be the line for reasonable use. The other thing I point out to the public, those of you that are especially here tonight for the first time, is what we're considering at this point. The process we've gone through after all these discussions and giving staff feedback is we've asked them for a recommendation, and it was to look at other areas that have similar urban interface. What do they do? What kind of ordinance can we look at? And the ordinance that's been proposed is here. So this is what we're considering at this point. I would invite you to look that over and give us some specific feedback on the ordinance that we're considering kind of from this point forward. It isn't a general conversation of are we going to allow hunting or are we not. It's how are we going to regulate it. So please take a look at that. It's really not very long. It's basically less than one page, the pieces that regulate that. And we'd love to have some specific feedback about those pieces. Primarily, I'll read a couple. That no rifle, handgun, muzzleloader, or shotgun using slugs or double-aught buckshot shall be discharged within whatever range we designate, which we want to make things as simple as possible. We don't want people to have to go to 2 or 3 different maps to figure out where they can go. We don't want to have to go to two or three different rule books to figure out what they can do. So a lot of the language is going to be along with state and DWR guidelines. The maps, I'll give my personal opinion about drawing a different boundary than what the hunting boundary is. Well, then they have to consult 2 different maps, and that's even more confusing. we need to find some other ways to restrict what can be done. And unfortunately, it is up to the hunter to know where they're supposed to be, which comes down to education and enforcement. Comments that I've made previously, I know that we've all kind of discussed, is that difference in posting. So for some of the property owners, whether they're in Herriman city limits or high country, where they previously abutted other private property and didn't have to really worry about posting, now they do have to worry about posting their property so that it's clearly marked so that people know they can't, that is trespassing, because now they butt up against or adjoin public property where they didn't before. So we brought that up again today in our work meeting. DWR has signage that's available at no cost, it sounds like. They have signage programs to help people with that. So property owners kind of need to do their part too to educate people. But if we don't do a good enough job educating people on access points, this is another thing that I think that I'm concerned about, and I think plays right into what everyone in high country is concerned about, is that is the main entry point. That is the only road that really leads up there. So whether they're looking to or not, that's how a lot of people are going to access it, unless they park at one of a couple of trailheads that we have and hike a long ways on the dusty trails. It's going to be a combination of county land, city land, so come back to education and enforcement. We can do a lot on our side with our police department now on our side of the line, but that's on the other side of the line, so we're going to need help working cross-jurisdictionally with that law enforcement agency. DWR can help a lot with that the first few years of having people there, and that's the presence is the key, right? If there's a presence there, they're not going to go hide in somebody's yard, right, behind the horses.
I think there's one thing that you said, I want to just add on something. It was recommended to us that we create a very unpleasant fine for trespassing as a deterrent to make sure that the hunters understand if they're trespassing, it's going to be, there's going to be some pain for that. But we can't enforce that in high country. That would be something that you need to go and solicit the county council for. Not passing the buck here, but I would encourage them to institute a similar type of policy once we maybe adopt something that they can enforce that same level of penalty for trespassing. So just want to encourage you to do that as well. So
right, which kind of dovetails into the next part of this, is that while we'll do everything we can to be responsible on the Herriman side of the line and encourage that cross-jurisdictional cooperation, we need that cooperation from the other side and those resources to bear as well. Again, reminding that nothing on their side of the line has changed. Hunting's always been allowed there. It's private property. It needs to be posted, et cetera, et cetera. But the access and the fact that the private property is now turned public on our side of the line, it does create a different dynamic that people need to be educated on. They're going, to the points made, people are going to go there. They aren't going to know where they're at, even though they should. So I think the first couple of years we have to go overboard on education and enforcement. But I'd ask for the same understanding from our friends in high country that we need some help from them to contact the county, Unified Police, et cetera. Division of Wildlife Resources and their officers have said that they'll work with us and provide as much of that education and enforcement as they can as well. And it will be a learning curve.
Yeah, I know too, most of the people that I hunt with, they download the app, right? There's an app that tells you who owns different property and things like that. So just make sure that we're synced with that with DWR, so that, because a lot of people depend on that, so that they make sure that they're not trespassing. So if we just make sure that we're synced so that those are indicated clearly, hey, this is high country, you may not hunt here, those kind of things, so that it's just easier for the hunter not to be trespassing.
Yeah. I'll just make another comment as far as education. There are a lot of people that just don't know any better. They're not experienced hunters. Those of us that have hunted, we've been there before. Some of us didn't have fathers to teach us. We tried to figure it out so we could teach our sons. That's me. And you do your best, but people are going to make mistakes. So who do you call if someone's made a mistake, whether intentionally or unintentionally? I think maybe that needs to be added to some of our materials. If you see something, say something. Well, who do you call for it? Right? I'm sure that DWR, et cetera, wants to know, because those people are making their jobs difficult, right? And they have law enforcement that can go over any jurisdiction. Am I wrong? So I think maybe we need to help people and help our residents know who they should contact, when those things arise.
Yeah, like in High Country with with HOA kind of stuff, pump out, a flyer that says, here's the numbers to call if, because you said somebody shot the deer from the car. Well, that's definitely illegal, and the DWR would have jurisdiction over that. This is my naive understanding. You guys correct me if I'm wrong. I know that part's illegal, but I think it's the DWR that would come at that point because you harvested an animal illegally. Same if they shot it in the lady's yard. Again, they can come in and enforce that and they do a great job of investigating those kinds of things because, again, it was harvested in an illegal way. So if the HOA could even put out information that would help people to have exactly those kind of contact information and things like that.
So I'll just say, kind of my closing comments is, as we consider an ordinance to help us govern this and curtail some of those instances, please read through this and give us suggestions on what we could possibly include in here, or just some of those best practices, because a lot of those things are just going to be best practices for education and enforcement that we can work together on. So please let us know those things.
Yeah, and one thing, Justin, maybe you and John need to get together and clarify some language, but I thought Steve Schlesinger asked a good question about discharging a weapon from outside of the buffer into the buffer kind of thing. I'd like to really clarify and specify just nothing coming into that buffer at all, right? And so I was trying to figure out how we can make that language a little clearer in the ordinance.
I want to make sure to touch on all the questions posed. One question was the urban deer mitigation program. Just to clarify, that's a mitigation program within city limits to help with our urban deer population that roam the streets and cause accidents, et cetera. The city, we have to budget tens of thousands of dollars every year for that program, and Justin might have to correct me on some of the particulars, but that program only allows certain individuals to participate in that. A lot of that's relocation. Any meat that is harvested is donated to willing recipients, needing recipients, et cetera. But that's not open to everyone. That's a select program for only a couple individuals. It's archery only. It's done very discreetly. I don't know if you want to maybe touch on that a little bit.
We've been doing it, we just finished up our 4th year of doing it. It's been very successful, and we do contract with a certain company to do that for us. So, they're contracted with, I think, probably over 5 or 6 different cities now to do that. Riley mentioned a couple of those, Mapleton, Highland, Bountiful, some of those things. So yes, it's worked really well. We have had some restrictions put on us a little bit. We can no longer transport animals for the fear of transferring disease and those things. So, but yes, it has been successful. And this last year, we've only removed 7 animals. So it's been very successful.
And that's only for those animals who are basically have become city residents.
Yep.
We're not paying their taxes.
Plus, I think another thing that's important to note a little bit here too is that the sportsmen's clubs, these hunting clubs and things like that, they donate a lot of money for things like vegetation on the hillside and things like that to try and keep the animals up out of the city and to improve the herd, the health of the herd and stuff like that too. So it's not just about just the sport of hunting. It's about doing a good job of really managing our herds and the population of the herds out here.
And my very last thing was police response time. That kind of ties back to my comment about DWR having their own law enforcement officers. That's all they do, right? They're the people to call and report that. They're going to have people in those areas that can respond versus if you call the local police department, it's going to go through priority, right? What level of priority is it? Is it life-threatening? Is it right down the list? So they're both law enforcement agencies, but they have different objectives. So I think that part of our education material and even enforcement needs to be who do you call and what instances.
Yeah.
So. That's all I got. Anything else from council? No. Okay, do I need to do anything official, Jackie, or we just move on? All right, we're good to move on. 7.1. I don't know, that's right, the same one. So consent agenda.
I will make a motion to approve the consent agenda as written.
Second?
Motion and a second. Steve?
Aye.
Sherry?
Yeah, aye.
Clint?
Aye.
I'll vote yes. Motion passes on to item number 9, discussion and action items. 9.1 is discussion and consideration of a request to rezone 4.53 acres of property located at 13494 South, 7530 West for Stephen Oweiler from A1 agricultural to A25. Michael.
Thank you. The Planning Commission made a recommendation to the City Council for approval of a rezone. The commission, as noted in your staff report and as we briefed you on January 8th, did recommend a zoning condition of a maximum density of 1.9 units per acre. I do want to clarify that the A.25 agricultural zone does have a range of density that's typically allowed of 1.8 to 2.5. And then within our zoning ordinance, there are methods by which a property owner or developer can essentially increase that density if they meet certain criteria. So the 1.9 is a maximum. It's not guaranteed. There are some things that a potential developer or property owner would have to comply with in order to achieve the 1.9. It was thought with the Planning Commission that one of those conditions would be that the lots that buffer with the unincorporated area of the city or outside of the city limits would be half-acre lots, which is one of those density criteria in the zoning ordinance. The general plan is agricultural residential. You can see the range on our general plan map is 1.8 to 2.7 units per acre, so the zoning request is consistent with the general plan. This was just an exhibit typifying what could be done on the property. Originally, again, the developer or the property owner is not asking for a zoning condition. So potentially, if they met all the different criteria within the zone, possibly there might have been 14 units on this property. Again, this is just a zoning change. This is not, the subdivision will be coming in the future. But if the 1.9 maximum were met, it would be approximately 9 lots on this property. So again, the Planning Commission is recommending approval, and be glad to answer any questions you might have at this time.
Any questions for Michael? No. I know the applicant would like to make a few comments. Mr. Oweiler?
Yeah, I just had a few comments that I wanted to add to that. The 1.9 that they were going to give me with half-acre lots buffering it back against the high country area. And I looked at it and looked into some of the other commitments, and I guess this is something that will be done, I guess, when I submit the subdivision. But it said in there that if 10% of the lots were half acre, which in this case 2 lots is 10% of 9, it's well over that. So I was going to ask them for an additional point, which would make it up to 2.0, which would make me available to have 10 lots rather than the 9. And so that's kind of what I was looking at and hoping for, is to have the 10 lots rather than the 9. But as far as the zoning and everything, that's the way it would be. On your paper, it says 4.53. I don't know how the county ended up with it this way. It was a 5-acre piece. 25 feet was taken off the front for the road. And then we did some different things for the county, and they required me to do some subdividing because I had a mobile home on it. And then my son bought an acre from me, or son-in-law, back in the back corner. And for him to not be landlocked back there, he asked me to sell him approximately 1/4 of an acre along the side of the property. Well, somehow that 1/4 of an acre is just hanging out in the air. When you look at the actual area of the lot that's left, it's 4.82 acres, not 4.53. And if you run the 10 lots into 4.83, 5, then 2.0 is what's required to have that number of lots. And with that other variation on there, that would create that. I've also looked at maybe putting another half-acre lot in there also to get that 10 lots. So that's kind of what I'm looking at and where I'm at on that. Does anybody have any questions on that or
Questions for him?
anything? Okay.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay.
Discussion amongst council?
Mike, could you speak to that comment about the acreage and the possibility of a 10th lot?
Yes. So this was something I had discussed with the applicant briefly. We understood that this was something that we would resolve through the subdivision process because they will have to provide accurate legal descriptions of the property. You'll notice in your ordinance, we referred to the actual parcel numbers to make sure that we were clear as to which areas would receive the rezone. Again, the applicant requested just the straight 8.25. The Planning Commission is the one who is recommending the zoning condition of 1.9. So the council certainly is at liberty to entertain the applicant's request tonight that you consider 2.0. Now, even if you were to give a 2.0 maximum, again, as I stated earlier, this property owner or a future property owner, if they were to subdivide, they still would have to qualify for those additional units by meeting the criteria in the zoning ordinance. So there's no guarantee that they would get those 10 lots, only if they would meet those underlying standards. And so we'd have to just evaluate that at the time of subdivision.
And that would be dependent solely on the exact acreage that comes out. So as
Right.
Mr. Overweiler stated, based on his 4.83, he'd qualify for the 2.0. But if it comes back at, no, it is the 4.53, that 2.0 wouldn't be possible with those credits.
And my bullet here saying that the zoning condition would result in development of 9 residential lots. That's based on our estimation. Again, if there is a more accurate legal description that increases those units or that area, we would reconsider that and see if he applies the correct criteria to warrant the additional lot. But again, this idea of having a zoning condition of 2.0, that is certainly something the council has the right to decide upon tonight.
And/or we can just simply rezone it for an 8.25,
absolutely.
and then it goes through Planning Commission, through the subdivision process, and wherever he fits along with the conditions that are already established in the zone will apply, right?
Right. Yeah, the zoning condition that was recommended from Planning Commission is you're not obligated to do that. We've obviously drafted the ordinance to represent the Planning Commission's recommendation, but that's,
And the
you're
only
certainly
other,
can
correct me if
consider.
I'm wrong, the only other condition that they recommended is the half-acre lots along High Country as
Yeah.
a buffer.
Which has been consistent with the whole area.
Consistent through the area.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
So even if you wanted to do that, we'd still want to keep that part.
yeah, so, do you guys have any more questions, or you want me to make a motion?
Just a quick comment. I appreciate the job that obviously our planning commission does. Having served there for many years, I can tell you that's probably one of the most difficult jobs in the city to really take on and apply the city ordinances to land use and try and do that consistently and in the opinion of everybody fairly. And we have some great planning commissioners on there who have a lot of experience in that. I certainly recognize their intent with the 1.9 based on what is currently available as part of the acreage there. I think that, again, based on the criteria that does exist to allow for that range of the 1.8 upwards from there, I think that based on the size of parcel, it'd be very difficult to get anywhere beyond a max of a 2.0. But I think for me, having been in this position before and really knowing what we want that look and feel to be out there again with the half acre lots, buffering the unincorporated area or high country there, just from my opinion, I would entertain approving it as it is, but taking that to a 2.0 to at least allow that piece to play out as far as determining exactly what the acreage is in there. But again, based on the look and feel of that area on the west side, I wouldn't want there to try and be any other attempts to try and go beyond, even though I think it'd be very, very difficult. I wouldn't want there to try and be any other attempts to try and go beyond that 10 lot maximum for that area.
I would agree with everything you said. At the 2 units per acre, the lots at the west side at a 1/2 acre lot, he still has to have the requirements to get the 10th lot. I'm okay with that. Yeah.
Well, the risk of upsetting the planning commission that works really hard on all of this, I would want to restate really, I mean, if we go that road, that's not overriding what the planning commission's recommendation. That would still be dependent on the total acreage being higher
Right.
than what
Again,
is
it's not a
listed.
guarantee.
Right. It's just allowing him the opportunity for that 10th
That
acre.
if it turns out
works
that
yeah.
way, yeah.
Yep, and I'm sympathetic to that for sure.
Me too.
Oh, yeah, me too. It's just,
Time for motion?
because I think the planning commission obviously would have been going off the same thing we were for 4.53.
4.53. Yep,
And so that, I'm sure that's why
absolutely.
they set that. And I live in that area, and I don't like it getting pushed up to the 2.7 because I don't think that was ever the intent of that zone. But I do appreciate the going to the 2.0. That makes sense. Okay, so I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 2020-07, authorizing a Herriman City zoning map amendment to rezone 4.53 acres, or this particular file number, correct? From A1 agricultural to A.25 for property located approximately 13494 south and 7530 west. And then do you want me to add, with the zoning condition of 2.0 units per acre, and the lots on the west side of the property shall be 1/2 acre lots?
I will second.
Motion and second. Clint?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
I'll vote yes. That motion passes.
Thank you.
On to 9.2, discussion and consideration of an ordinance making amendments to the administrative code enforcement process regarding service of process for code violations and issuance of a certificate of noncompliance. Sheldon.
Evening. My first time doing this, so if I fumble around, just let me know.
Don't mess up.
So, yeah. So I guess January 22nd, we proposed a text amendment to the code enforcement procedure, which would help our agency, well, our department, with the efficiency and clarity of, and how we actually enforce codes throughout the city. And the largest portion of that amendment would be adding a certificate of noncompliance to our process. And what the purpose of that certificate is, just it provides a document to the actual property owner, letting them know that in the process that they're in, that their deadline for compliance has elapsed, and now they're accruing fines and penalties to the city. And I guess I'll be a little more clear on the process. So typically what we do when we open a case for code enforcement is we'll start with a courtesy notice. At that point, if we don't get compliance through a courtesy notice, we issue a certificate of a notice of violation. And that notice of violation states that if you're not compliant with a certain deadline, then administrative action can be taken. We can, assess fines and et cetera. So at this point, there's nothing after that notice of violation is issued. There's, other than an invoice that will go to the actual property owner saying you owe the city this much money for these fines, there's no documentation to inform them what's actually happening in that process. So that's the main push, for this amendment. There is some clarification in some of the process on how we serve some of these documents. If they do require to fall into the Utah Rules of Civil Procedures, we're just adding that we specifically like to use certified mail return receipt requested. The additional amendments kind of correspond with the code, with the certificate of noncompliance, which it just states that the certificate of noncompliance should be served via regular mail, and the other amendment just adds that process in the actual procedure, just states that after the deadline after they've reached the deadline on their notice of violation, then certificate of noncompliance will be issued. So is there any questions? I guess the city did recommend, the city staff recommended approval for this ordinance, so.
Now with your experience and time of being here in the city and working through this process, obviously I understand that really the recommendation for this is for clarity of process, communication, which is always important. Based on if this is adopted and approved, just tell us what you think, how you think that this is going to make your job better or easier or benefit the city long-term moving forward.
Well, we actually, the way it helps, it actually it informs the actual property owner that, hey, you know, the violation, you are in violation and you're not compliant and you've defaulted on the city's request. At that point, when they receive that notice, that really gets their attention. So today we actually had our first, hearings today regarding code violations. And what brought the majority of those people into the hearings was the fact that they received that certificate of noncompliance.
So it's really it's going to add an additional step and help really clarify that.
Yeah, and that's the
piece.
point, just to clarify the process of, you know.
Sheldon, in your comments to us a couple weeks ago when you were talking about this, you had mentioned that you felt like this was an opportunity to allow those that had been in violation to come in and alleviate or negotiate or mitigate the fines that they might be accruing. So it's actually a tool for the person who's violated it to perhaps come to a less costly resolution, right?
Correct, yeah, because part of the process, even prior to the amendment, is once they go into violation and they default, the city can actually, they can be summoned to a hearing to plead their case, and that certificate of noncompliance kind of states that. Just informs them that, hey, the legal action is being pursued, you know, and it requests that they contact us, and when they do, then we work with them. We'll say, hey, at that point, you'll be contacted by a hearing officer, come in and plead your case. This is, you know, the intent of the city is not to, you know, make additional funds off the fines. You know, the point there is to actually, you know, seek compliance. We'd rather see that money go into your property as opposed into the city.
To be clear, we lose money on any of those fines. The
Yeah,
cost that
so-
we have to have it go through the court far exceeds any fine that's levied.
Right,
But
another part of this process too is actually retaining the hearing officer as well, so.
on our focus is always education first, you know, educating them, giving them every option, but this is more when it's reached the point that something needs to be done. Neighbors have complained and we have responded and asked for things to be done and they haven't. This gives a clear process of what
Exactly,
what happens next.
And the hearing today, the hearing officer, he sees this as an educational process as well. He informs them of the procedures, why this is happening, you know, the intent of the city for compliance, you know, and it just informs them saying, hey, you know, we just want to see compliance. We're not here, you know, we don't want to be the bad guys. We're just trying to, you know, make a better community for everybody.
Perfect. Yeah.
I'll just go back really quick to a comment that I made about the Planning Commission and having a very difficult job and sometimes a very thankless job. We recognize that really you are put in that position. You know, someone sees someone show up out in front that says code enforcement officer, it's usually not because they're bringing you, you know, a box of crumble cookies, which I love, by the way, if anyone. But that being said, it is such an important part of how you maintain a look and feel of a community. And just want to acknowledge the work that you're doing, because again, I know it's a challenging job that you're put in, but appreciate the work you're doing and giving us a process that with a little more clarity and a little more opportunity for our residents to come in compliance as we move through that process. So thank you.
Yeah, ditto.
And I like to mention as well, and I think I mentioned this before, is like the approach the city takes is an educational approach. So when I, you know, speak with residents regarding violations, we approach it in an educational manner, saying, hey, we're here to just inform you. We're not, you know, initially when we approach the residents, we're not there, you know, with the ball and chain. We're like, hey, this is what needs to be done. How can we help you, you know, come into compliance? And that's the approach we take, and it works very well.
Excellent. Perfect. Okay, we're good for a motion?
How about I do this one?
Go for it.
Take my first one, all right?
There's no extra stuff on it.
What's it, no? Yeah, right. I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 2020-08, making amendments to the administrative code enforcement process regarding the service of process for code violations and issuance of a certificate of non-compliance.
I will second, and a gold star to Steve.
Motion is second. Sherry?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Clint?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes. The motion passes.
Finally get a gold star instead of getting
And a
dumped on
mental
all the
note
assignments.
for Clint's birthday, crumble cookies, everybody.
Thank you.
Future, thanks, Sheldon. Future meetings, February 20th, Planning Commission, 7 PM, February 26th, City Council Work Meeting, 5 PM, City Council General Meeting, 7:30, County Council, Olympia Hills, possible decision Tuesday, February 25th, and Tuesday, March 3rd. Please mark that on your calendars and show up. We need your help. Events, February 15th, Miss Herriman Daddy-Daughter Dance, City Hall, 7 PM. February 19th, Perks in the Park, at Jaylen Park here it's at 9 AM. I think that's all we have. We have a couple.
Motion to adjourn our regular city council meeting and reconvene in work meeting.
I'd like to modify that motion and add a 10-minute recess.
Oh, I was gonna do that
10
anyways.
minutes.
10
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
we have CDA.
We have another meeting if you want to stick
I
around.
will recant my motion and motion that we adjourn from our regular city council meeting and convene in the Special Community Development and Renewal Agency of Herriman City.
With the
meeting.
10-minute break. Now? Or you want to do this? Okay. All right.
Second?
Motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, all right. We are adjourned and now convened in the Special Community Development and Renewal Agency of Herriman City. We've got, let's see, just a couple items. 1.1, motion for review and outline of finalization process to approve the minutes of February 12th.
I'll make a motion to have the minutes of February 12th, 2020 be prepared and distributed to each member of the Redevelopment Agency Board. The board will have 10 days to review the minutes and submit any changes to the secretary. If after 10 days there are no changes, the minutes will stand approved. If there are changes, the process will be followed until all changes are made and the board is in agreement.
Second.
Motion is second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Moving on, 2.1, discussion and consideration of resolution approving a participation agreement with Game Point Properties LLC in the Herriman North Community Reinvestment Area. Heather.
Thank you.
I tried to make you stay
Thanks,
longer.
John. I know, I love when Jackie puts this meeting after the regular meeting. So this is a participation agreement between Game Point and the RDA. This was continued from December. One of the reasons it was continued, we had this in the same resolution as the Herriman Partners Participation Agreement, so we needed to separate those. This is a sales tax only CDA, and here's a map showing the location of Game Point. It's the 6 acres here. So Game Point was approved last year, as well as the development agreement was approved by council last October. It is about a 48,000 square foot building with, you all know, it's where all your families are gonna hang out. Can't wait for it to start. It should be starting construction in the spring. So the key points for the participation agreement is the $100,000 reimbursement for Miller Crossing. It's for the right-of-way. Do you have any questions on the details of that?
My only question or clarification is this is sales tax from Game Point itself?
Yes,
or
just
from
from
the entire area?
Just from the 6 acres.
Is that called out in the agreement? Yep. Okay.
That was my only one, too. I
Yeah,
just
mine
want-
too.
But I saw, just making sure that was spelled out in the agreement, that it
Yep.
was contained to just their
Yep, just on
property.
their own,
Their own sales
what they
tax.
generate, yes. And they have, we put a 5-year limit, so they have 5 years to pay that. We have 5 years to pay that, whatever comes first.
Okay.
They have 5 years to generate it, and we have 5 years to pay it.
Sorry, what?
5 years to generate it?
Yes.
Okay. It's TIF.
But for clarification, we reached that maximum at 2.5 years. It expires at that point.
Yes. Yeah, whatever comes first, the
Whatever comes
100,000 or the
first.
5 years. Mhm.
And it's a 50% per year
50% of the 70%.
of 70%.
Because we get 70, and then we
70%.
divide
The RDA collects 70%, yeah, and then 50%.
So it's 50% of that.
50% of that. Maximum 100,000.
Yes.
Maximum 5-year collection. Okay. So my questions, any other questions?
Nope.
1%.
Do we have?
I will make a motion to approve resolution number R2020-01, approving a participation agreement with Game Point Properties LLC in the Herriman North Community Reinvestment Area.
Second,
Motion and a second. Roll call on this one. Steve?
yes.
Clint?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
I'll vote yes. The motion passes. And now we can do the other
Now
thing.
I will make a motion to adjourn our RDA meeting and reconvene in our city council work meeting after a 10-minute break.
Second,
Motion second. All in favor?
aye.
You are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.